Checkout tracking by the NPD Group brings you a receipt collecting system that gathers data anonymously through technology we created, providing your businesses with answers.
The first speaker for today is Dr. Serkan Toto, who's the founder of Kantan Games in Tokyo. Dr. Toto has been doing this for over 10 years, helps publishers and developers get into Japan, and also advises Japanese companies on how to move out. He has an awesome blog at serkantoto.com and also a really good Twitter account if you want to follow and keep up on the news. So with that,
Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing? My name is Serkan, and I have been living in Japan since 2004. And I think I know quite a bit about, or I've got to learn quite a bit about the Japanese games market over the last years. And today's topic is cracking Japan: how foreign developers can enter the world's most lucrative mobile games market. Sounds good, right? So let's go with the first slide. So very quickly about me. So the MC kindly said a few things already. Perhaps just as a very quick summary. So I've been based in Japan, as I mentioned, for over 10 years now, and I went there as a student. So I'm originally from Germany, and so the motivation why I'm so close to Japan and why I'm so interested in that country, and why I'm now almost you could call me Japanized, is that I love games so much. And I've been playing games for the last over the last 30 years, which indicates you my age as well. But so I love games. I love Japanese games in particular. I still love them more than Western-made games, for example, even though the US and Europe and other places have caught up and actually overtaken Japanese game makers in many ways. And what I'm doing currently is that I'm running this game industry consultancy called Kantan Games, which is based out of Tokyo and advises game makers in the US, Europe, and Asia, as well as investors that are interested in investing in publicly traded mobile game companies. So basically, I have two client groups. And I'm running this website on Japan's mobile game industry that I think is probably one of the very few, or maybe even the only one, that kind of regularly tries to update people on the current state of affairs in Japan's mobile game industry in the English language. I don't think that there are many other sites like that around, unfortunately. So yeah, about the Japanese mobile games market. So I will not go through all of these bullet points that try to summarize the current state of affairs in the Japanese industry for mobile apps. Let me just take this bullet point on the bottom as one key bullet point, and I think that if you're a foreign game developer, the first thing that I think you need to understand is that it's an extremely mature market. It's not only the biggest mobile games market in the world, but it's also the most mature market, meaning you have a highly advanced supply side, games with extremely high production value. Just as one example, one of Bandai Namco's latest games that they put out on mobile has 150 voice actresses voicing the characters inside the game in version 1. Right, and I don't see that really in other markets outside of Japan, not on this level. And that's just one example for the sophistication of the supply side of the game providers over there. So they're very professional, and they have to be, because Japan is also a home of the most sophisticated demand side when it comes to the mobile games market. So the Japanese users are extremely demanding, very sophisticated, and I would say they're the most well-informed users in the mobile games when it comes to mobile games globally. And when you enter the Japanese mobile games market, and that's the top two bullet points. You have to be aware of the fact that you're competing with roughly 500 to 700 mobile game providers in Japan that are doing serious work in that area. So this does not include hobby teams or individuals, et cetera, that are doing mobile games, but really just halfway serious companies that are in that business. And yeah, so you can ask yourself the question, why Japan? I mean, why should I even bother to have a look at this distant, very mysterious, sometimes mobile games market when I'm doing relatively well, or when I can relatively do well in English-speaking countries, for example. There's a couple of reasons, and I think the number one reason, the key reason, is that the mobile games market in Japan is just very, very big. So around 2013, App Annie, I would say, as the first foreign company, started covering Japan's massive size when it comes to mobile games. So in October 2013, according to App Annie, Japan started surpassing the US in terms of app revenue for iOS and Google Play combined, which is a pretty amazing accomplishment, if you will, when you take into account that Japan has just a third of the population of the US. And then, mainstream media like the Wall Street Journal and TechCrunch and other news sites jumped on that fact. And here's a snippet from the Wall Street Journal back from December 2013, talking about the same topic. And in 2014, App Annie again, they released this list of the top 10 publishers in the world by revenue on iOS and Google Play combined, and 5 out of these are from Japan. And technically speaking, Supercell is a Japanese company now, because 51% of Supercell are owned by a telco called SoftBank now. So it's the amazing point about that list is that essentially, with maybe the exception of Line, all of these Japanese publishers are just almost just doing business in Japan. So 90%, way over 90% of the sales that have made them enter this list come from their home market. And the market is really big in terms of sales. So for 2016, this projection by a Japanese company called CyberAgent is saying that in 2016 we can expect roughly $7 billion US dollars. I think that the 2016 numbers converts to 7 or close to $7 billion US dollars at the moment. So Japan has the world's biggest mobile games market, period. And another point is on the demand side, so that was basically the supply side. So on the demand side, you have the situation that Japanese users, they are not only the most sophisticated users in the world, but they also pay the most. So this slide from the Japan Online Game Association, it's a relatively new one. So it says that for the ARPPU, not for the ARPU, but the ARPPU in Japanese games on smartphones, you can expect something across the board, 6,842 yen, and that currently converts to about $56, and that's per month, right? And you don't have that anywhere else in the world but in Japan. And I think that this number is 5x, 6x, something like that, the number that you have in many, many other mature Western markets. About the ways to enter the Japanese mobile games market. So there are a couple of ways, just like in other foreign countries that you try to enter as a Western game developer, for example. So option one is if you're a big company, you just muscle your way in, right? And you just pay a lot of yen to get into the market. So the best case study for a company of that size is Supercell in 2013. So this is a screenshot that I took back 2 years ago of a news site called AppBank, and AppBank is Japan's biggest iOS news site. So these guys are huge. I mean, just think Touch Arcade times 1,000 or something like that. I mean, and there are certain rumors in Japan that the news site might go IPO soon, because they just have such a massive reach and generate ads with ad revenue, etc., etc. And one of the buyers of these ads 2 years ago was Supercell, when they entered the Japanese market in earnest with Clash of Clans, with a not localized, but fully translated version, and they bought up the space the advertising space on the PC side, and what you can see also there in Japanese is that it says PR. So they've also bought a PR article on that site, and they made many more things with that with the App Bank. And they pushed out strategy guides for the game to familiarize the game with Japanese users, etc., etc. And King followed a year later, and what King did is essentially what Supercell did 1 year before. They just threw money at the problem, at the user acquisition problem. And King started, started using every user acquisition tool, in the book, including TV advertising. And what you can see here is a screenshot from a TV ad where King has used, or King's advertising agency has used two famous Japanese celebrities, to make the game more appealing to local users. And Machine Zone followed this year in 2015, and so Machine Zone also does TV advertising in Japan. And it's not like TV advertising here in the US for mobile games, where people talk about the Super Bowl spots, etc., etc. It's real TV advertising. So these are real campaigns that can run for weeks and weeks and months in heavy rotation on national television and in prime time. So these spots are not hidden at 3 a.m. or something like that. So these spots are basically competing with the TV spots for Toyota, Nissan, or Sony and other big Japanese brands. And as a consequence of that, there are quite a few bigger foreign mobile game developers that now have offices in Japan. And this is just a selection, but there are many more than that. And I think that in the future, even more will try to enter the Japanese market with their own presence, with local staff, etc., etc. But what can you do when you are smaller? And I think that here in this room, not too many Supercell or Machine Zone people are present. And also, for the people watching the video later, I think that you have several options. And the first option is that you pray for a miracle, that you just put your app into the App Store and make it also available to Japanese developers, and hope for a Flappy Bird kind of scenario. I think that this is, in theory, this is always possible, right? I mean, you can have, there are viral hits like that in Japan where, and you can see them all the time when you just check the free download ranking, in particular on the Japanese market. So you have some quirky apps that make it up to the top. People start talking about them, and then the developers are happy. But usually these developers are always Japanese developers. So these miracle kind of overnight successes happen only for Japanese game makers. So what you can see below is a short list of so-called global viral hits that have never made it to Japan. So in Japan, for example, Draw Something. I don't think that too many Japanese mobile game users know even what Draw Something is or what it was. Same thing goes for Song Pop. Crossy Road was a very minor success, I would say, in Japan for various reasons. Flappy Bird, I think, peaked at the top 25 in the free download ranking, and then just quickly fizzled out. And even Angry Birds in its early days, and also in its later days, it still has problems establishing itself as a hit game. The second option is, of course, do it yourself. When you are, for example, a mid-sized developer, when you have a certain, maybe not the biggest marketing budget, but a certain marketing budget that you can use for the Japanese market, you can essentially you can apply the same cookbook for the Japanese market, but it will not bring you much, because the Japanese market is so unique. It's so different from other Japanese market, from other global markets, that this kind of I use the same marketing strategy in Japan as well, will only get you to a certain point, and then you will hit a wall. And I think that soft launching, for example, what a lot of developers are doing in smaller test markets to see how the KPIs pan out and how the users are reacting to your game, etc., that doesn't really work in Japan, because Japanese is only spoken in Japan and nowhere else. And you can hire a local PR firm or marketing firm, but it's extremely costly. So Japan is, doing business in Japan is not really cheap. But what you can do is, and that this is what I tell, in the case that smaller developers, because it's usually only bigger developers that are contacting me for advice. But when a mid-sized developer does call me or does contact me, I tell them, you can acquire a test audience in Japan. Through global ad providers like iAd, for example, or Google. You can use Google's entire ad suite, or you can use providers like Tapjoy, Chartboost, or other channels like YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter without a lot of hassle. And just try to capture first test audience that way, just to see if your game is working or not. And some local ad networks in Japan, some local marketing agencies, they're also okay with working with smaller developers that have that might not have the budgets that Machine Zone has, for example. But you usually do have to have a certain marketing budget, but it's not, they're not expecting millions and millions of dollars from small and mid-sized developers. So it's not that strict actually. There are certain other alternative free options for distribution for foreign game developers. So features by Apple and Google Japan do work in Japan. I think that the features are not working as effectively as in other countries, like here in the US, for example. But the same kind of featuring system also exists on the Japanese market. And what I think a few people don't really know is that both companies, Apple and Google, have editorial teams that are connected globally. So I would say that if you have a great contact, or if you happen to have a great contact at Apple or at Google Japan, these guys are to actually, or can talk to their peers in Japan, for example. So that's really possible. There are also alternative platforms, DNA's mobile game, which I think a lot of you know, is not so much on the native side, but they do exist on the native side. An alternative. Gree is another alternative, and a company called CyberAgent also has several alternative platforms that you can use as a game developer, or you can talk to that company when you seek distribution in general in Japan. And there are chat apps like Line or Viber. That you can, Viber is now a Japanese company, or belongs to a Japanese company, that you can go and talk to. It's not difficult. It's not easy, but they are an alternative in terms of distribution. There are several telco app stores in Japan that have a certain audience, not a huge audience like in Korea, for example, but a certain audience. There are app subscription plans by telcos. So this is a very Japanese thing, where you have a certain pool of apps that are selected by the telco, and you as an end user, you subscribe to that pool on a monthly basis, and every month you pay round about $4 to have access to that pool of a few hundred pre-selected applications. And KDDI's so-called Smart Pass program is the #1 in that area. So these guys, I just checked a couple of days ago, they have over 13 million subscribers at the moment, which is an unbelievable number. So every one of those subscribers is paying 390 yen, which is $3.50, $4, something like that. And as the last partnership, because I think my 20 minutes are running out, as a last option is you can list up partnerships here. So in general, I would say identifying and closing partners like like-minded developers or investors or publishers, of course, is a function of business development, just like everywhere else. So in general, this identifying and also dealing with potential partners is the same in Japan as anywhere else. But I would say that despite of the big size of the Japanese market, it's relatively difficult to find publishers. So this has been at least my experience for the last years, that the #1 concern for foreign game developers when they want to enter the Japanese market is, I cannot find any partner. They are not speaking English. I'm emailing them and I'm not getting back a response. There are several companies that are generally okay with with working together with foreign game developers. I mentioned Line, Viber, and DNA, Gree, CyberAgent is another one. But there have not been too many success stories in the past. So this is a small list of relatively big companies that tried to enter the Japanese market, or that tried to do business with Japanese companies, but not much has actually come out of these partnerships so far. But there are a few companies that are specifically focusing on importing foreign-made content into the Japanese market. So here's an overview. So not all of these companies are active at the moment, and some are more active than others. But these companies like Third Kind, for example, or Chorus Worldwide, they are focusing on bringing especially Western content into the Japanese market. So as a foreign game developer, a few of these companies theoretically are an option to enter the Japanese market together with a partner. Localization, if I have the time, if I have 1 more minute. Yeah, so what localization? So I think that in general, you should ask yourself if full localization, so changing graphics, sound, UI, text, etc., is really necessary for your game. I would say that the answer to that question is usually it's not really necessary. Or it will not lead you to success that you would not have otherwise. So I would say that Japanese users expect Japanese text inside the games for sure, and this includes UI and menus, etc., in app descriptions and also in advertising. So when I fire up my Facebook app, for example, in Japan, I see a lot of Western game developers advertising their mobile games for a Japanese audience in English language, and that's that's just money throwing out of the window. And I would never do that. So this is I would say a key factor, a minimum when it comes to localizing games for the Japanese market. So the games should always have a Japanese text, a translated text, and in as high quality as possible. And as an example, Clash of Clans or Game of War, for example, relatively not text-heavy games, but they do have text inside these games. They would have never worked in Japan using English text. Absolutely no chance. And in other places in Asia, like in the Philippines, for example, or in Malaysia or in Singapore, English text is no problem. But in Japan, that's absolutely impossible. And I think that generally speaking, localization is more important outside the content. So if you're a mid-sized game developer, for example, and if you actually can afford things like customer support, marketing campaigns, or community management, these things should be handled the Japanese way. And you cannot do customer support, for example, in Japan by outsourcing that customer support to the Philippines, for example. That doesn't work on the Japanese market, so it has to be done by native speakers. And as a final point, and I think I can close the presentation with this final point, a big deal breaker for foreign game makers on the Japanese market when you have applications like RPGs, for example, or strategy games. So for casual game makers, it's not that big of a problem. But if you have a deeper game that has a certain appeal to users that are more into mid-core games or more into even hardcore games, I think that a lack of events and live operations, where that's an area where Japanese game companies are absolute masters in. If you don't have that, if you are offering a mid-core game or relatively a deep game on the Japanese market without heavy live operations or event management, I think that you will have a tough time. And yeah, so this is the last bullet point, and thank you very much for listening.
Great, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Toto?
Thank you very much for that awesome presentation, Dr. Toto. Question similar to the last point that you've made about events. Are there any recommendations that you yourself would make around game design that Western developers should consider in particular when designing for the Japanese market or tweaking their existing game?
Yeah, so let me answer you that with this slide, right? I mean, I don't know any foreign-made game that has been fully localized, including graphics and changes in game design that you mentioned, specifically made for the Japanese game, that has been successful. So there are some, where app developers have tried to make the graphics more Japanese, or change the sound, make it more friendly, make the UI more friendly to Japanese users, but it didn't really work. So I would be generally skeptical. If you have an existing game and if you change the game a little bit to make it more appealing to Japanese users, I think this is really difficult. For event management, I think that what I would do is I would try, if that's possible for you as a game developer, I would try to hire a Japanese event planner. Because there are, inside Japanese game developers, there are game planners, event planners that don't do anything else but design and execute events. And this is something that has not really, spilled over to Western game developers. So it's really, really difficult. So to answer your question, I would hire a Japanese guy that knows what he's or she's doing.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Any other questions? I did have one question actually myself. I'm curious, what are the kind of the most standout games that you've seen, Western games that you've seen enter the Japanese market? I mean, you've mentioned some of the big ones like Game of War, Clash of Clans, but which ones would you point out as being the ones to study and follow?
Yeah, I would say that if there's one great case study for how to do it really right, it's Supercell. It's Supercell with Clash of Clans. So I think that these guys have executed the best. For them, it's relatively easy because they have so much money, right? I mean, they can just hire the right people. The company Supercell Japan is now being run by the former CEO of Hulu Japan, for example. So they can get any kind of executive that they want to lead the Japan operations. They have local user acquisition teams, etc., etc. But for smaller or mid-sized game developers, I have a hard time thinking of many examples. Where it has actually worked. I think that if you look at the top 30, top 50 grossing rankings in Japan, for example, there are two things. So the rankings are almost completely dominated by listed, publicly traded companies, by big ones, Bandai Namco, Sega, Supercell, as a foreign game developer, and Gung-Ho, Mixi, etc., etc. And the number of foreign game makers is very, very low that are in that top 50. It's essentially just Supercell, King, and Machine Zone, and that's it. There's no mid-sized game developer that has actually had a sustainable success on the Japanese market.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much.